Hello and welcome to Cracking the Cryptic. So, a bit of a new adventure today. We've been asked several times on the channel to show how to set a Sudoku rather than how to solve one, because people think they would find it very interesting. Now, we don't know a lot about setting classic Sudokus. We solve them, but setting them is a different art. Although possibly Simon and I have set one or two Sudokus in our lives, it's not a skill that we really know much about. However, we have been working on some sandwich Sudokus for an app that's about to launch shortly, and obviously we'll keep you informed about that. But what that has given us is some insight into how to set a sandwich Sudoku. Now, this is one of the type where there are numbers outside the grid for every row and column showing the total, the sum of the digits between the 1 and 9 in that row or column. So what I'm going to do is show you one way that I would set one of these. Now, there are various ways. And then you can kind of play along as you wish. So you can either pause the video here. We'll put up the link to the finished puzzle, and you could try that and then come back and see how the puzzle you've just done was set. Or alternatively, you can watch the video and then have a go at the puzzle, even though you'll have seen some of the placements, but deciding just to solve it logically. Or thirdly, you can just watch how you set a puzzle and leave it at that. And we'll just try and show you how we might go. So what I'm going to do to start is to dispose the 1s and 9s in the grid. Now, what I've learned is that it helps, in terms of the solve later, it helps for there to be not many 0 and 35 clues. Now, those are clues outside the grid where either 1 and 9 are right next to each other, so the sum of digits between them has to be 0, or they're at the ends of the grid, so the sum between them has to be 35. Although that can provide, especially the 35, a good starting point for someone solving a puzzle. It also, firstly, can make it a bit too easy, but also, more importantly, it can mean that it's very hard to keep the puzzle kind of clean in terms of working out which other numbers, which givens you have to put in the grid. And I'll explain a bit more about that as we go along. But what I'm going to do is basically set out these 1s and 9s. The goal here is that once you get 1, 1 or 9, and once you know which cells these kind of n numbers go in, that you should be able to, at that point, work out which of 1 and 9 they are. So to do that, I try and come up with a pattern where we can work around the whole grid virtually in 1s and 9s. So this 1 leads on to a 9 here, leads on to a 1 here, leads on to a 9 here, and ideally we'll get all the 1s and 9s to follow round until they come back to this 1. Now, it won't matter if 1 or 2 of them don't follow that pattern, and all I'm being here is reasonably random. But something I'm trying to avoid is having 1s and 9s next to each other too often, and having 1s and 9s at the ends of the grid. Obviously, we have to have 1, 1 and 9 in each row and perimeter row and column, but just not too many of those is the goal here. So we're carrying on. It's fine to have 1 square between the 1 and 9. In fact, that's a very useful starting point a lot of the time, and I think we'll find that as we get to the solving part. But this pattern seems to be working fairly well. There's always a chance I will finish up with a cell where both the 1 and 9 have to go, and then I have to roll it back a bit. There we go. I think we've got all the 1s and 9s in. We've got spaces between them, but never less than 1, and never as many as 8. So that's a good start. Now, the next point And I mean, my goal here is to have as few givens as possible and for the puzzle still to be solvable, because that just seems to give the nicest experience to a solver. Now, there are a number of places in the grid where there are 2 cells between 1 and 9 now. And a good thing to do with those, in terms of making the thing solvable, is to have them be one of the only possible combinations. So if a 2-cell place added up to 5, that could only be 2 and 3. If it added up to 6, that could only be 2 and 4. Once you get to 7, there are 2 possibilities, and that's still better than if there are 3 possibilities when you get to 9. But I'm going to try and keep the possibilities down, and by that I mean that, for instance, if I put 3 and 2 there, once you've found out that there are 2 cells between 1 and 9 in column 9, you'll find out that the digit that gives the clue is 5, and you'll know that that must be 2 and 3 in some order. Now for this row here, I'm going to make the total 6, which I can still do by using a 4 there and a 2 there. It couldn't be a 2 here because there's already a 2 in the box. But that means that, again, I'm giving a useful clue to the solver. Now we can extend that principle to areas where there are 3 cells between 1 and 9, like here. And again, we could do that with 2, 3, 5 is the only combination, and 2, 3, 4, are the only 2 combinations at the low end that give only one possibility. At the top end, 8, 7, 6 and 8, 7, 5 are the 2. Now, we can also extend that to where there's a 4 space, and here we've got a 4 space including a 2. So I'm going to go low end, and we could make this 2, 3, 4 and 6, and we're certainly going to get a unique solution there. So I'll make it 2, 3, 4, 6, just like that. And now in this 2 space between a 1 and 9, I'm going to make it 6 and 8. And as I said earlier, there's only one combination that gives 14 from 2 digits. Now 14 is quite a useful number to have appearing in the clues outside the grid, because 14 is one of the very few numbers that can be made up of 2 cells, 3 cells, or 4 cells. In fact, I think it's the only one. 15. 14 and 15 can be made up of 2, 3, or 4 cells. So what else have we got? We've got another 1, 9 here, and the natural thing to do would be to kind of go with the high number, but I'm going to go low again, put in the 2, 3 there. And now in a moment, I'm going to start finding myself constrained with what I can use, because I'll have used so many numbers that I'll basically be running out of possibilities for how the puzzle can work. So I'm going to put in 8, 7, 5 here, and maybe 8, 7, 6 here. Let's just switch that up. Now that's not going to work. What I've just done is impossible, because 9, 2, 4, 1, 3 across row 6 here, with that 6, we need 2 out of 8, 7, 5 in here, and I've just used them up here. So that method isn't going to work. So I can't do it like that. What I'm going to go with is a smaller number here instead. So I'll just reverse that 875 into 857, and here I'll try and use lower numbers. 2, 4, 1, 3, 8, 7. Yeah, no, I can't just use 2 big ones. So let's get rid of 8, 6, 7. So 7 would have to be here. This would have to be 6, 8, 5. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to abandon the idea of making column 3 a one-only possibility. But column 3 will be quite accessible to the solver, because he'll get the one number that's between 9 and 1 in due course. He'll know exactly what that is. So let's make that a 4. This could be anything at the moment, and I don't really mind which way we go. Now this cell, there's only one possibility left. We've got 1, 8, 5, 7, 9, 6 in the column, 2, 3 in the row. That's going to have to be a 4. And we're already finding ourselves constrained, rather like a solver, into what cells, what squares can contain what digit. And that's kind of part of the fun of this, is you do get these constraints and you have to try and work within them to make the puzzle work. And now a lot of this from this point on is going to just be experience of knowing how to create these. Now, the other way of looking at columns and rows is the numbers outside them. And just like the numbers inside them, if you can constrain those to one possibility from the number outside the grid, given the number of cells, that will help the solver and it will keep the puzzle solvable. So up here, in column 7, outside the 1 and 9, I've just got these 2 top cells. And since I need an 8 in one of these 2 cells at the top, I'm going to use it here. Let's put a 7 in there and see if we can... No, that's not going to work. This has actually got to be a 3 because we need a 3 in this column. So this isn't working quite as cleanly as I'd hope. And that's the risk, but it may still solve as a puzzle. And that's all I'm really looking for. If I give too many clues, in a way, from constraints early on, it may solve too easily. So we just do what we can at this point. And then just towards the end now, we will probably find that we can play around with the constraints a little to make it more solvable. That has to be a 7. Now, in fact, this whole thing hasn't worked again, so I've given myself a little too much to do, yet again, because now I'd need a 5 and a 6 up here, and that would clash with what has to be a 5 or 6 there. So, consequently, yet again, I'm going to change what I've been doing. Let's put a 3 there and a 4 there. This can be 5, that can be 6. We're getting different totals from what I was planning, but I think this should still work. So I'm going to carry on. You have to be fairly fluid when you're setting this sort of puzzle, because there are ways in which it will work and ways in which it won't. So 9, 2, 8, 1, 3. Everything I'm doing now is kind of constrained at the moment, and I'll tell you when I have a choice to make. One of these is going to be a 2. 6, 1. So we are going to have a few with choices to make. So this 4 space, turns out I couldn't keep it down to 2, 3, 4, 6, but I've kept it down to one of 2 possibilities. These 4 numbers add up to 16, and that can only be 2, 3, 4, 7, or 2, 3, 5, 6. Where's 8 going to go? Down in one of these. So now we have one more chance, I think, to use a 2, which is outside this 1 and 9 in the bottom row. And I'm going to make this 8, 6, consequently. Now we have to have 5. That gives us 6, 5. These are now 4, 7. And that has to be 8. This has to be 6. And really, the constraints are playing pretty hard now. That has to be 4 or 7. That has to be 4 or 7 because there's 6, 5 in the row already. I think this is going to work quite nicely as a puzzle because there are some neat... These 4 7s are going to be quite hard for the solver to figure out towards the end of the puzzle, and they'll probably need one particular gap between 1 and 9 to figure those out. That's a 2 or a 3. 1, 8, 9, 2, 3, 4. Where is 6 going to go? 6 is there. 8. I think we might still have one more choice left to make. Oh, look, 4, 7 again as a combination. I think that's going to really prove interesting in the solve. 5, 9, 3, 4, 2. Right, this is 2 and 6 as a combination. So this pair is 4 and 7 again. That's 5 or 8 down there. Now, the important thing to do, though, is to give the solver an actual chance to work out the 4 and 7 possibilities. So if there's somewhere where I put 1, 4 or 7 in and not the other. And in fact, I think even this row is going to be quite interesting. So what I'm going to do is make sure that from these two possibilities, that it doesn't add up to a number that can be done either way. And that's okay, because I don't think that's possible. So this should work okay. So I'm going to select, let's make it 7 and 6. I think that'll keep it fairly easy for the solver, because that is the highest part of both cells there. And now this should enable us to fill in most of the rest of the grid, actually. 2, 6, this becomes a 7, we've got a 4 here. Now, something that we really want to avoid is just at the end, and this is something you have to do just as you come to the end of these puzzles, is to really watch out for this. And what you want to avoid is 2 pairs of cells that share digits. So this one has to be 5 and 8, this one has to be 5 and 8, this one has to be 5 and 8. If I make this one either 5 or 8, then the problem I've given myself is that those are fully interchangeable in the final grid unless I make one of them a given. And how I know that is because I can see that they're both outside the 1 and 9 in the rows. You can see 9 here and 1 here. These 5 and 8, if that's what we made it, would be outside the 1 and 9. And in the next row, the same would be true. 9 and 1 are here. And then they're inside the 1 and 9 in both of the columns. So the clues outside the grid couldn't resolve those if they were both 5 and 8. So I'm going to put the 5 down here instead. And I think this might work. Now, still, I'm not an expert enough to know exactly what I've created, and a lot of these puzzles, therefore, have to be resolved by testing them, and that's going to be the next step. However, something has gone wrong here. So my only number left to put in this cell is a 7, and that clashes with the 7 here. So I must have made another mistake. Yes, look, I've got 2 5s in that grid. So in fact, wow, that's annoying. I couldn't really get away with it there. So I'm going to have to make that a 5. And therefore, the other thing that I can do, as discussed, is give a given cell. Now, I could reconstruct the whole thing, but it's not terminal to have a given cell. And we'll live with it. What I will do is see if I can find a symmetrical square, a symmetrical cell with one of those 5s and 8s that is a 1 or a 9. Because one of the interesting things to note in these puzzles is that you have to have a given that's a 1 or a 9, otherwise you could swap all the 1s and 9s. The clues outside the grid will not resolve that for you. All they tell you is that the extreme numbers fit in certain cells. So here we go. This is what I think might be a very useful grid, and we've got to choose one of those 5s and 8s. Now they're opposite 1, 6, 4 and 9 here. So I'm going to select the 1 as being, so I could choose either the 1 or the 9 to be symmetrically opposite. I'm going to choose that 1 opposite that 5 and see if this gives us a solvable Sudoku. So I've decided to actually put a couple more givens in the grid because I just don't think we had enough information from just the 1 and 5. Kept them symmetrical, but hopefully it'll be more helpful now that we've got 2 of the 1s and 9s. Filling in the squares at the moment that we know cannot be occupied because of the 1s and 9s we've got. A 24 or a 26 have to have at least 4 cells between the 1 and 9. A 14 has to be at least 2 and can't be as many as 5, so we can fill in some bits here. Now this 31 has to involve the 5 middle cells. 5 is useful because although it could be 2 or 3 cells, it can't be more. Now it's quite interesting up here as well The 5 can't be above the 9, or that would require another 1 in the same box. So the 5 must be below the 9, and 1 must be in one of those 2 cells. This must involve a 9, and then at least 4 cells, so that can't be a 1 or 9, or you just couldn't get enough to fit the 9 up there. So here we've got a 1 in one of these 2 cells, and there's only a 6 here, so the furthest it could possibly extend is here. We can put a few more X's in. Now that is useful because we know that there has to be 1 of 1 or a 9 in those 2 and 1 in those 2. They can't be next to each other, there's no zeros up here, so they must form a checkerboard pattern. And this one can't be here because you'd need 9 more to make 35, which is the maximum. So we know that the 1 is there and the 9 is there, and that gives us a bit more go forward, if you like. The 1 in this column must be at one end or the other. 17 can't be made up with just 2 digits, so that must be 3 as well, minimum. The 9 is either here or here at the bottom. 6 here, no, we don't know about that. One of those is a 9, but we don't know which one. And, this middle row has 4. Now that can only be made up of 1 digit, so we get the 1 placed there as well. 8 is either 2 or 3 digits, so we know it doesn't extend to the end of the column. This box, we can complete those. Now 7 in this column, that can't be 3 digits. So neither of these 2 at the top can be a 1 or a 9 because it just couldn't fit in. So the 9 and 1 must be down in these bottom 4. And that means we can only have one of these be a 1 or a 9, so one of these must be a 1 or a 9. We don't know which one yet, but one of them must be. So one of these must be. And now this column with the 16, this is exactly as interesting as I'd hoped when setting the puzzle. It's worked perfectly in a way, because this one can't be the 1, because then there'd be 5 gaps. Oh no, look, sorry, that could be a 9. So no, that hasn't done quite what I was thinking yet. But still, making steady progress. Now this is interesting. We know there's a 9 in one of these 2 cells, and that 9 can't go with this 1 because none of these clues are small enough. So, whichever of those is a 9 must go with something further on. In fact, we've got to fit, here's the thing, we've got to fit 2 1s and 9s in this box, and they can't go next to each other, there's no zeros around the outside, so they must be there. That gives us this 1 placed, this 9 placed, and this 9. Yeah, there we go. So that's quite useful. Now this is interesting. In this column, we've got 2 numbers placed. To make 17, we've already got 9. We need another 8. It could be 8 there and 9 there, or 2 and 6 and 9 there. So that actually hasn't ruled it out. But this first column, we know there was only a 4 outside the 1 and 9, so 1 must be down here. This can't be a 9 now with 21 in the bottom row. So the 9 is there. We now know that's an 8. So this row 8 needs a 3. That has to be like that. So our 9 must be here now. We get a 7 there. And this column will be helpful now with the 16 because it can't be more than 4 digits long. Now in this row we need 5, and we've had the 5 used up as a given. So that turns out to be quite useful. That puts 1 there, 1 there. I think this is going to be quite a nice puzzle. And we've just got 1 9 left to put in. It must be here. Okay, so now let's get rid of false 1s and 9s that didn't materialize, at least. I'll leave the X's for now and we'll get rid of them as we go around the grid. Now, which clues have we used and which ones haven't we? Let's work from the bottom. 21 here. That means that 14 has to be outside the 1 and 9, and there's only 2 cells. They have to be 6 and 8. Now, sort of remember that we set that up, so that's worked quite nicely. We've done this 3. This 5 has to be 2 and 3. So they go into those cells. That actually means we've got a 4, 5, 7 triple running along here. And this 6, that has to be 2 and 4. And again, we set that up fairly carefully when we were creating the puzzle, so it's not a shock. This 4 we've done. This 26 has to have 9 outside the 1 and 9 to make up the 35 maximum. And 9 could be made up of 2, 7 or 3, 6. We don't know which, so we can't use that yet. Next row up, 14. Again, that has to be 6, 8. Next row up, 19. That's much less usable at the moment. That's an intermediate number. Next row up is 26. Plus 4 is 30. We need a 5 at the top there. Now let's go across. So 5 in the final column, we get a 2 and a 3 between the 1 and 9. 22 here. Now that's interesting. We'll come back to that in a moment when we've filled in what other givens we can. 24 here, that makes these two 11, so we can't resolve those yet. 16 here. Now that means that this set is either 2, 3, 4, 7 or 2, 3, 5, 6. So this one can't be an 8, and it must be 2, 3, 5, 6, and that resolves that being a 4. So these ones are 3 and 5, and that's quite useful. 7 here, we've done that. 8 here, this X must become an 8. 17 in this one we've done. 20 in this one. Now we remember that 20 in 3 digits can only be made up of 8, 7, 5. So we get the 8 there. And we don't know about 5, 7. Oh yes, we do. We've got a given 5. That's very useful now. That given 5 was inspired. 1, 8, 5, 4, 9. And here we have 31. We've done it. Right, we said we'd come back to this 22. Now, outside the 1 and 9, they must add up to 13. So that can't involve the 8 here, or we'd need 3 and 2, and this cell can't have 1. So that must be the 6. Then these other 2 must add up to 7. Well, we know that can't involve a single 7, but we don't know quite how the rest is going to resolve. But this 6 now plays by ordinary Sudoku rules into this box here. With this 6, the only place left for a 6 is here, which is nice. And one of these 2 must be a 6. And we don't know which one. So we have to go again and find which clues we haven't fully used. And here we are in row 4, 26. What we did work out was these final 2 have to add up to 9. And we now know that's 2 and 7. So the remaining cells in this box are 3 and 6, although we don't know quite how that works yet. Now, where else didn't we use the clues? This 19 up here, it's got an 8 in and 3 other digits that add up to 11. So they must be either 2, 3, 6 or 2, 4, 5. If they were 2, 4, 5, it would be 2 here and 4 or 5. It's possible here. If it was 6, 3, 2, it would be 6 here, 2 here, 3 here. So we know this is either a 2 or a 6, but I don't think we can prove which one yet. So 31, 20, 17, they're all done. 8's done, 7's done. 16's effectively done here. 24. We need these to add up to 11, but we don't. Look, the 8s here mean that this must be an 8. So it must go with a 3 to add up to 11. That's useful. That resolves this 2-3 pair here. Now we needed this column to have 13 outside the 1 and 9, so that must be a 4. This cell must be a 7, and this must be a 5. Lovely. We get 6, 7 to place here, 5, 8 there, and 3, 2 here. Now, if we were doing a normal puzzle, we'd know we were kind of on the finishing straight at this point. But because we're testing a puzzle here, we don't know if it's going to work. So we have to be very careful still with how we place everything. This has to be 3, 4. This has to be 5, 6, 7. Now we can do the 3, 6 here. All going very nicely. There may be one clue that we haven't used yet, but I think we've used almost all the clues outside the grid. But it seems to be working quite neatly. I mean, this is quite a nice puzzle, I think, for a solver. 4. Fingers crossed, it does seem to be coming together. 4, 2, 5. Now, maybe we could still run into a problem with a pair that can't be resolved. That really does happen quite late on a lot of the time. But it's looking good here. 2, 3, 5, 4. And I think we've done it. We've proved that with those 4 digits, we get quite a nice puzzle. I don't think it's the hardest I've set, but it's a real puzzle. And it's a real grid. It works very neatly. And that's how you can set sandwich Sudoku. I hope that was interesting. It's a very unusual format for us, but it's been requested and I hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe to the channel if you like the content. That's always good. Feel free to sponsor us on Patreon. Look for Cracking the Cryptic on Patreon. We'll put a link to that in the description as well. And do, of course, tell us in the comments what you thought of this rather entertaining diversion. And I will, as I say, put up the link to the puzzle so you can play it if you haven't already. Thanks very much for watching and hope to see you again soon on Cracking the Cryptic. Bye now.